Hey guys, welcome back. So today we want to talk about 3 bullpups. Each of these rifles is currently available on the US market. Each of these rifles is in military service someplace in the world. Now we've come up with a grading system based upon features, functions, and things like that. And we came up with a chart, and then we went through and tried to honestly rate each of the rifles. And at the end, we came up with a number, and whichever rifle has the lowest number is the one with the best features. I think you guys are going to find the outcome of this little exercise interesting. I know that we did for sure. But before we get started with today's video, guys, if you enjoy the content that we produce here at the Military Arms channel, please take a moment to join our Patreon family. There is a link in the video description below. Once you join our Patreon family, you'll have early access to videos like this one. You'll have direct access to me. I answer all private communications, and there's some other perks as well. So please consider becoming part of that Patreon family. With that being said, let's get started with today's video. Over the years, you guys have seen me use a lot of primary arms optics, everything from red dot sights to magnified optics. And why do I do that? Well, over the years, they've offered very good products for a very fair price. They have fast shipping, outstanding customer support, and that's why you've seen me using those products for so many years. If you guys would like to pick up a magnified optic like you see on this Daniel Defense Mark 12, you can pick up an optic like this one. Just put it in your cart over at pa.com or primaryarms.com, and if you use the code MAC at checkout, MAC at checkout, you'll get a free scope mount with your optic, and that goes for any Primary Arms branded optic. If you pick up an optic that has an integrated mount, use that code MAC at checkout, and you'll get a free Kill Flash ARD for that optic. So please swing by and check out primaryarms.com. So this is the new Hellion / VHS2. I'm going to call it the VHS simply because it's easier for me to say. It rolls off the tongue a little bit more easily. And Hellion is a rather goofy name in my opinion. If you look it up in the dictionary, you'll find it pretty much means misbehaving child, which I think is a bit goofy for a rifle name. So let's just go with VHS. This rifle has some interesting features on it. We'll start off at the rear and move our way forward. First of all, it has an adjustable length of pull. This is not something you've seen on military bullpups elsewhere. And because of this, you'll notice, because we have the stock that can be retracted and extended, that takes up a little bit of room here, which also pushes that ejection port forward. So when you're shooting this rifle, you'll notice the ejection port is more in front of the shooter's face. With the other bullpups, you'll notice they're more underneath the shooter's cheek. And again, that's to accommodate this adjustable length of pull. It has 5 different settings. On top, we have this cheek riser. This cheek riser does a couple of different things. It wasn't present on the first iteration of the rifle, but it's been put on there for a couple of different reasons. It's not something you can adjust the comb on. It is primarily there to act as a buffer to ramp your cheek up to this elevated rail system here, but it also holds a pin in place that holds the trapdoor, or not really the trapdoor, but the port cover closed on the side of the rifle that you're not using the ejection of. And when I set this up for left-handed use, you'll see what I'm talking about. But with it set up for right-handed ejection, you'll see how the port cover pops open like an AR-15 M16. It's closed on the other side of the rifle, and there's a pin holding it, and this cheek riser holds that pin in place. So if you want to mess with the cheek riser, you have to retract or extend the stock a little bit. You can pull on it, and then you can see it'll pop up just a little bit. But if you push on the front of it, it'll just nose over, and then if you touch it in the back, it'll just pop forward. The ejection ports are quite large. They flare out from the receiver of the rifle on both sides, and that's so you have an ejection port buffer. If I'm shooting this, it's set up for right-handed use, and I'm shooting it left-handed, it's not going to throw spent cases in my face, right? Even though that ejection port is far forward, that actually assists. And when the brass comes back here, hits this, it's going to throw it at the 3 o'clock or the 2 o'clock position, but away from the shooter's face. It can't make it back and hit the shooter in the face like it can on the Steyr AUG. But you can also easily set it up for left-handed use, and we'll talk about that when we field strip it. It comes with iron sights that are actually pretty robust for basically backup sights. The rear sight is fully adjustable. It has an aperture on it, and there's a little button that says press. You press that down, the sight will pop up, and then you can turn this drum to pick the range. It has a 0 marking, which is a broad opening for a combat CQB type peep, and then it has the next peep is a 1 to 200 meters, and then you have 3, 4, and 5, and then back to 0 and 1 to 2. Across the top here, we have an aluminum pick rail that's mounted to the plastic receiver here, and then it comes out and it actually engages with the gas block out on the end of the rail, and then it's polymer here as well that it attaches to. On the front sight, you have that button, you press it, it locks in the upward position. The rear sight is adjustable for windage. The front sight is adjustable for elevation via this little screw that you can turn to put the sight away, both front and rear, press down on the button again, and fold it away. It does have quite a bit of rail space out here, so you can put an optic on it, you can put a laser up here, you can put a light on an offset mount or something like that. This rail is pretty much the longest rail I've seen on a bullpup in terms of being far enough forward that you can actually use various accessories with it that you normally wouldn't be able to use with other bullpups. You'll notice that the charging handle is pulled to the rear. It's locked open on an empty magazine. The charging handle, like a G36, in that it can pivot out both sides, but when you pull back on it, it'll stay in the outward position until it goes back home, which then it'll pop forward. So when I drop the magazine out of the gun, it has a magazine release that's right here. It's just a piece of sheet metal. You have to pinch it and strip the magazine out. There's no button to push and the magazine won't fall free. It's basically like the AUG. You have to reach up there and grab it, hit the release on the AUG. On this one, you hit the release right here, pinch it, and kind of beer can it out. When the charging handle goes forward, it'll flop back so that it's running parallel to the barrel. You can also go out the other side. And then this little device appears to be a forward assist of sorts. And when we take the gun apart, when you look at the bolt carrier, there's going to be a hole in the bolt carrier that this, when you push it down, a little pin engages with. So it would appear that you'd be able to assist the bolt home. It's not called out in the owner's manual, but that's pretty much what it looks like it is. The selector lever is present on both sides. So the mag release is ambi. The selector lever is ambi, but it's in an awkward position. It's kind of up and kind of forward with this cant that it has to the lever. So it's kind of weird, but it is, again, set up on both sides. You have to break your grip to access it, but it's at least ambi, right? Going forward, we have a hand guard on it that has M-lock slots around it, so you can put, again, accessories, a vertical foreign grip out here, maybe a light on the M-lock. Moving forward, we also have an adjustable gas regulator. So it has a suppressor setting and a normal setting. It's just a two-position gas block. And then out on the end of the 16-inch barrel, it typically has a 4-prong flash hider, but we've taken that off and put an OSS muzzle device on there and running it suppressed. The only reason the AUG isn't suppressed is just because it sucks as a suppressor host. The VHS seems to be pretty good, but it's still louder, in my opinion, than the X95, but we'll put it on the meter when it warms up outside and we'll find out just how quiet or loud the gun actually is. Let's take it apart and see what makes it tick. Now, first of all, I forgot to mention in the last segment that the gun does not have a manual bolt hold. So if you want to lock the bolt to the rear, you have to either insert an empty magazine, pull the charging handle to the rear, it will lock open because it locks open on the last round fired, or you can reach up inside the magazine well, hit the bolt stop in there. It's in the same spot as you would find on an AR-15. Push up on that with your index fingers, you pull the charging handle to the rear, and that will lock the bolt to the rear. To release the bolt, you have the bolt release right here. Now on an X95, you just push up on it. This one you pinch, and so this rear area here is a thumb stop, if you will, a thumb rest, and then so you can pinch it and pull this lever back, which then releases your bolt so it can go forward. So we want to make sure that the weapon is clear. Check the chamber, weapon is empty, and you'll want that bolt home before you start the disassembly process. Back here, you have a push pin. All the pins go from right to left, and they're captive. You're going to push this pin out, pull it across. Now the butt stock, you're just going to kind of pull out and up and out. Let me show you why. So you're going to kind of pull it back, rotate it a little bit. You see it's at an angle, and then pull it out. That's because that little hook right there is engaged. To take it out of engagement, you kind of got to tilt it down a little bit, then you can pull it out. On this, we have the recoil spring and guide rod, and a secondary guide rod that also rides through the bolt carrier that's attached to the buttstock. Next, take the bolt out. Just take the charging handle, pull it to the rear. It'll come out the rear end of the gun, and there's your bolt and carrier group. If you want to take the trigger pack out, you have a little button on the underside of the gun right here, and there's a little detent right there. So you're going to push on that detent and push up on this little button, and that will pop the trigger group loose so it can come out as well. This is where the trigger bar engages the sear, this little thing sticking up from the polymer trigger group, polymer housing anyway. Next, you can take out the magazine well. The original VHS used a proprietary magazine. This one uses Steyr magazines. I don't know if they'll ever make a different type of mag well, but much like the G36, it's one of those components you can take off the gun if you so desire, which does make it a bit easier to get into there to clean the receiver area, something that's a bit more difficult with the other rifles. Moving forward, we have another pin right here. I'm going to push that pin across, take it out, and then the handguard just pops off. Notice there's no heat shielding or anything like that. Now, you probably wondered what this big button was that's present on both sides of the rifle. That big button can be pushed either left or right, but when you push it in and then lift up, it'll take the top handguard off along with the charging handle and pick rail section, and that's just the locking mechanism for the handguard, or the top section of the gun. If you take a look at the charging handle, let's see if Jason can get in there, but there is, where's my little bullet pointer? Right there, there's a little pin that when I push on what I called the forward assist earlier, when I push on it, you can see that pin pops out, it protrudes. If you take a look at the bolt carrier, there's a hole in the bolt carrier. So when you push down on that button, that pin will protrude into this hole, which the bolt carrier rides through, and that would allow you to get a hold of the bolt carrier and push forward with thumb pressure as somewhat of a forward assist. That's what we believe it is anyway. It's not called out in the owner's manual. Next, here's the gas block. You'll notice that this top handguard is held in place by the receiver back here, but it engages with the gas block in the barrel up front. So this barrel does flex in the receiver, and if you flex that barrel, you're also going to slightly flex that pick rail. The gas system easily comes apart. Just grab on this little serrated area here, hold the gas piston itself forward, grab on this little black part there, pull it rearward and out, and then the spring will come off, and then one part of your gas piston comes out, and then pull on that, and the second part of your gas piston comes out. And that's it. That's fully disassembled using no tools. To put it back together, you just repeat the process. Also, this little piece right here, if that flops around on you, don't worry about it. It has a little indexing mark on it. Put it back in place when you reassemble your gas system. It's fairly simple to do. In the owner's manual for the VHS, it will say that how you see the gun right now is as far as you need to take it down for basic field maintenance. But to accomplish a left-handed conversion of the rifle, you will need to take your bolt carrier group apart, and I'll show you how to do that. First of all, you'll notice there's this big head on the pin on the right-hand side of the carrier. On the left-hand side, you'll notice there's a little small head on the pin. Push it across, take that out, and that's what's holding your firing pin in place. There's a safety right here on the back of the carrier, firing pin safety. Lift up on that. That will release the firing pin and spring so it can come out. Next, you have a cam pin that's visible right there. To get it out, just kind of tap the bolt carrier group. It will come out, and then once it's out, you can take the bolt out. Now you have field stripped the bolt carrier group assembly. Now to put it back together as a left-handed ejection gun, all you have to do, when it's set up for right-handed ejection, your extractor will be on this side. Your extractor is right there. To set it for left-handed ejection, you just take the gun apart, field strip it like I've shown you, give it a quarter turn the other way so the extractor's on the other side of the carrier. And once you do that, you can put the cam pin back into the gun and reverse its position. This is probably the most tedious part, trying to line this thing up. For me, anyway, it is. Get down in there, okay? Once that's in place, take your firing pin and spring, push up on that safety, and it'll go back in. And now, push the pin down, firing pin down, push that pin across, and make sure you've got protrusion, which we do, so it's back together properly. Okay, so now it's set up for left-handed conversion. We have one more thing to do. Remember this cheek riser? Now you're going to pull it back, and because the stock is off of it, you can now rotate it up. And you can see what's underneath there. Now that I've rotated it up, you're going to notice on the port cover on this side, it remains closed because it has this pin holding it closed. When I remove this port cover can now pop open. Now you can see right through the receiver. Now we're going to close the other port cover on the right-hand side of the rifle. Going to stick that pin back in. There we go. And then this holds that pin in place. Okay? So it's kind of a cheek riser, but it's also, and kind of a shell deflector, but it's also there to hold that pin in place. Now the gun is completely set up for left-handed use. To accomplish that, just reassemble the gun. And when you're going over the hammer in the sear pack, it's going to offer a little bit of resistance. Just give it a tap with the palm of your hand, and it'll get past that spring tension on the hammer that's pushing up on the bottom of the bolt carrier and go home. You can also do it this way. It's kind of dark, but you can stick your recoil spring in there and line up that secondary guide rod and push it home that way, which will make it a little bit easier. Otherwise, you can just kind of invert the rifle with the bolt carrier home, put the buttstock on, just kind of wiggle it. That pin will find its home for you, and then just push this down, push the pin across, and the gun is now set up for left-handed use. When I pull the charging handle to the rear, you'll see that it's going to fire and eject out the left-hand side. Port cover still works. All right, so now the rifle's set up for that left-handed use. Pretty simple. Let's compare the three guns to each other. To accomplish this, we decided to use a chart. And with the chart, we're going to have different features down the left-hand side, and we're going to rate each of the rifles and compare them to each other and see which one gets a better score than the other rifle. Whichever rifle has the lowest score is the highest scoring rifle. So we rated them 1, 2, 3 because there's three rifles here. Either it came in first, second, or third place, and then we went on down the list. You can add things to this list which would change the outcome. You can subtract things from this list which would change the outcome. It's as scientific as we could make it, but it's still very subjective. With that being said, here is the chart of comparison. Down the left-hand side, we have the different features we want to compare, and then across the top, we have the various rifles. We'll start off with Ambi, rated the VHS number 1, simply because it's very easy to convert that from left hand to right hand and right hand to left hand without having to buy extra parts or components. You can do it in the field without special tools, and that's not the case with the other two guns. AUG comes in last simply because the AUG is probably the most difficult to convert, but when you do convert it, you still can't swap the location of the charging handle. It stays on the left-hand side of the gun, making the gun very awkward for a left-handed user to use. So that's how we came up with that rating system. So 1 is number 1, 3 being the lowest. Accuracy. VHS really surprised us this afternoon. The gun with 55 grain ball and 62 grain ball, either with Norma or Federal, it seemed to shoot right around 1 inch, 1.2 inches, doing 5-shot groups. It really liked that lighter ball stuff, the 55 grain stuff in particular. We even tried it with some match ammunition, but it seems as the bullet got heavier, the gun lost some accuracy. So again, it's going to favor those lighter rounds, and it's going to shoot ball ammunition like 55 grain Norma to about a 1 inch group, which is pretty darn impressive for a bullpup. Now, we also know that the X95 is probably the least accurate of the three out here, and the AUG is kind of known for its accuracy. If you have any questions about the accuracy of these two rifles, I have videos out there, as do other YouTubers, and you can go dig around and find more information on the accuracy of the other two. VHS number 1 in our opinion. Ergonomics, overall ergonomics. Rated the X95 number 1 because it has familiar controls. The selector lever is easily accessed. It's out of the way. It's not going to gouge you like the AUGs can do. It has the ability to set it up very easily for left-handed use. Of course, the VHS is a little bit easier, but it has a magazine release in a familiar spot. You push that magazine release, the gravity is going to take the magazine out of it. With the AUG and the VHS, you're going to have to strip them out. So X95, number 1 in terms of ergonomics. I also like the placement of the bolt release and the bolt hold open if you want to use it in that capacity versus the other rifles. 2 for the VHS, 3 for the AUG. Disassembly, and this is like taking the gun completely apart in the field to clean it. Rated the AUG number 1 simply because just 2 pins basically hold the whole thing together. It just falls apart in your hands. The barrel comes out very easily. You can get to that chamber area and clean it very easily because you can access it because it's completely out of the gun. Number 2 is the VHS because even though you can't take the barrel out quickly, there's not so much polymer and stuff in the way of getting in there and cleaning that chamber. It's much harder to clean it than an X95 or even an AR-15. So the X95, even though you get all the components out of it, it's still kind of hard to get up in there with Q-tips and stuff to clean that chamber area because it's just a little bit more awkward. So the VHS comes in number 2, X95, 3rd place. Fire controls. X95, everything and mags. Everything just seems to be in the right spot on the X95. The magazine release, the charging handle, the selector lever, fire controls, all in the right spot. The VHS is number 2. The AUG comes in number 3 because that selector lever for me, that cross block safety, it's sharp, it gouges my finger. It's just not as ergonomic and easy to use as the other 2 rifles. So number 1 spot goes to the X95. Accessory mounting. VHS comes in number 1. The VHS has a lot of rail space up on top that's in front of the shooter's face. The AUG has a lot of rail space depending on the configuration you have, but it's much closer to the shooter's face. So you can get accessories onto the VHS like lasers and lights on that top rail that you wouldn't be able to, for example, on the X95. Again, the rail comes back to the shooter's face on the X95 as it does on the AUG, and that just makes it more difficult to mount those additional accessories. So VHS number 1, X95 number 2, because it has rail sections all the way around the handguard, and number 3, the AUG, simply because it has a vertical grip and very little real estate on the sides. Even though they have that little goofy rail on the right-hand side of the receiver, it sets kind of far back to be used practically for anything, really. Weight. The VHS comes in number 3, AUG number 1, X95 number 2. That's because the X95 weighs 7.9 pounds, the AUG weighs 7.3 pounds, very lightweight, and the VHS is a little bit porky on the 8-pound side. Conversion kits. Number 1 for the X95, because currently you can pick up, or generally you can pick up 9mm conversion kits or 300 blackout conversion kits. With the AUG, there are conversion kits out there, but they're really hard to find. And with the VHS, it's brand new on the market, and therefore there really isn't anything out there yet for it. That may change down the road. The sights. The VHS comes in number 1 because the integrated sights on it are really nice. They're metal, they're micro adjustable, they're very usable. AUG, not so much. It doesn't come with any sights. And then, I'm sorry, up here. And then the X95 comes in second place because it does have folding metal sights in it, but they're not quite as robust as the sights on the VHS. Suppression. Giving the VHS number 1 spot right now because it's the only rifle of the 3 that actually has a suppressor setting. Now, how loud it is on the meter, we won't know until it warms up outside, but the VHS was intended to be suppressed. It has that setting. The X95 works pretty well with a OSS can, but keep in mind it's a non-adjustable gas system. Put a baffled can on it, and it's pretty hard on itself and pretty gassy to the face. And then last but not least, the AUG, simply because it just sucks as a suppressor host, period. Trigger, the factory triggers on them, how do they rate to each other? The X95 is number 1. It has the most crisp trigger on it. There are also Geissele triggers out there for the X95, but just talking about factory triggers, the AUG comes in last. It's the longest, creepiest, most plasticky feeling trigger, although it's improved over the years, and it also has aftermarket support for it. The VHS, we gave it number 2 spot. Its only downside, it has a nice crisp break and things like that, but the trigger travels almost all the way to the back of its rearward-most travel up against the pistol grip before it breaks. So you're not going to get the pad, at least with A-pans like mine, on the face of the trigger. You basically have to wrap your finger around the trigger. But when you do, the trigger pull is fairly light, crisp, and good. So the trigger, number 1 to the X95, 2 to the VHS, 3 to the AUG. Slings. This is based on the mounting points that the rifles have. The VHS has the most mounting points that aren't covered up like the X95. That's not the case with the VHS. It has mounting points all up and down the rifle. All right, aftermarket support, number 1, I would say the X95, based on all the stuff that's out there for it. It's a very popular bullpup and a lot of stuff out there. Number 2, the AUG, and I think it's more limited simply because the design is more limited in terms of accessories and where you can mount them. And then last is the VHS. It's brand new on the market. There really is no aftermarket support for it. So when we go through and add up each of these columns, we come up with a number value of 23 for the VHS, 23 for the X95, and 32 for the AUG. The X95 and the VHS come out dead even in terms of features. Now you can add or remove just one category and it changes the outcome of this particular exercise. So again, it's not something that I think it's very subjective. Let's just put it that way. We would like to thank Tomlinson's, which is a gun store right here in Indiana, that put this Hellion in our hands so we could do today's video. I hope you guys found the comparison between the 3 5.56 military type bullpups available on the US market, the comparison between the 3 of them, to be useful. If you guys would change something on the chart, if there's something that we forgot, let us know in the comment section down below. We do try to read all of your comments. If you guys enjoy the content that we produce here at the Military Arms channel, please consider becoming part of our Patreon family. There is a link to Patreon in the video description below. Also, right here on YouTube, you have the ability to click that little join button underneath the video player you're watching right now and support us here on YouTube in the age of demonetization. And last but not least, guys, please swing by and check out coppercustom.com. Thank you for 14 years of support, and we'll talk to you guys soon.